Well, hey there, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, as the case may be, depending on where you're listening from, and welcome to today's webinar, Found Money, Cashing In on Grants, Tax Credits, and Other Incentives. And you know that theme music, that can only mean it's a Ball Publishing webinar, and I'm your host, Chris Beytes, editor of GrowerTalks magazine. That's me there, you know me. We're going to be talking about grants, tax credits, and incentives for, the next 45 or 50 minutes or so as we get the scoop on how to find, well, dare I call it free money to help pay for your next expansion or upgrade. Now, as usual, I am not the expert on the topic, but I know the guy who is, and he is, well, there he is, Dan Kuipers, Grant and Incentive Specialist with TrueLeaf Technologies. Welcome, Dan.
Hey, thank you, Chris. Welcome to you too, and everybody else listening as well.
Now, one of the fun things about webinar technology is you can do it from pretty much anywhere on the planet that you have a laptop and an internet connection and a telephone. Where are you broadcasting from today?
Well, I'm broadcasting from good old Holland, Michigan, that is, not overseas, but from my office here in Holland, Michigan.
There you go. And actually, I'm in my office in West Chicago, Illinois, the 418th floor of the Ball Publishing World Headquarters. So right across the, I could probably see you over there across the lake. Now, I introduced you as our expert on grants and incentives, but what makes you an expert on the topic? Fill us in on your background, if you would.
Well, by way of background, I founded a company called Sustainable Energy Financing, and have worked in the field of garnering incentives and educating mainly a very large grower base on how to go about getting incentives, grants, rebates, tax credits, and have done this work for the past 5 or 6 years. It's been a very interesting field and successful as well. The money is out there, and I think that's what makes me the expert.
Well, and that's what we're going to talk about today. As a matter of fact, what you're going to be covering, you're going to help us to find, identify, and understand incentives, and the most important thing, acquire them. How do we get the money, in other words? Leveraging incentives, I'm curious what that means, and then identifying the kinds of projects that are suitable to get incentives on. And I know you've got some sample projects near the end as well. So all that said, we've got lots of attendees out there all around the country, if not the world. You're going to have questions. You can use the chat area or the Q&A area, whichever you prefer that you see on your screen there. Just type it in. We'll get to them as we go along if they're sort of appropriate to the topic we're on at the time. And we'll take some time at the end as well. And if there's anything that's just too technical or too specific, Dan said he'll field those questions in person, well, not in person, but via telephone call or email or what have you. Right, Dan?
That is correct.
All right. And if you're not here for some reason, or if you have to say log off because a customer comes in, please take care of your customers. The webinar is being recorded and it will be archived at ballpublishing.com/webinars, along with all of our other webinars. Same place you signed up, as a matter of fact. So, all of that said, Dan, are you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do this.
All right, let's dive right into it. Take it away, Dan.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you for everybody who's out there listening and joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedules, I'm sure. I hope that you'll find today's webinar enlightening, informational, and as Chris said, any questions or conversations that may warrant some further discussion, you'll see contact information for me later on during the webinar, so you can reach out to me directly if need be. The topic today is found money, cashing in on grants, tax credits, and incentives. I think really we ought to preface this whole thing with defining incentives. You're going to hear me use the word incentives a lot. Mainly, I don't want to say rebates, tax credits, and grants every single time. So, for purposes of our discussion today, what we want to talk about really are the different flavors of incentives, mainly being rebates, which could be offered by utility companies and other entities. We'll get into that. Tax credits, grants, and I also want to take this little moment here and point out that the incentives that we'll discuss and the processes are going to vary wildly from state to state and utility to utility. So right off the bat, I'm going to give you a very good website and resource for any of you to use, which is listed there as www.desireusa.org. Don't worry, that's not a bad site. The DESIRE stands for the Database of State Incentives for Renewable Energy. And at this location, you'll also be able to find many different programs, state-specific, utility-specific, not just for renewable energy, but also for efficiency measures and other grants which are related to our industry. Now that we've defined the incentives, really what we want to start to begin to talk about are the different flavors and which ones are right for you. So what I want to do is just kind of break down each one a little bit, give you a couple snippets of information, and we'll start with rebates. Rebates, as the name implies, are usually a refunding of money from some type of entity, usually a state or local government, utility company, be it your electric company or your natural gas supplier, in which you simply can basically buy equipment, determine whether or not it's eligible for some type of rebate, and go through the process and help get part of that equipment paid for. There's two main types of rebates that you should be considering and looking at, and each one's a little bit different. The first one that I want to discuss is what's known as a prescriptive rebate. These are among some of the most lucrative types of incentives that are out there, primarily because of their ease of application, as well as the fact that they do offer significant dollar amounts for everyday pieces of equipment that we all need. I like to call them a checkbox application. Typically, they're very short forms. You buy this, you check the box, you send it in, and things work out great for you. I do want to contrast that with what's also known as a custom rebate. Custom rebates are usually reserved for maybe more complex projects, new construction, where a number of different project technologies are going to be kind of utilized together. Different types of systems which are going to interact with each other, and basically a custom incentive, custom rebate allows you the ability to really combine all of these different technologies, do some calculations and negotiation with the utility company or the other incentive agency, and ultimately determine, what type of money is going to be available for what you want to do. Now, that's a little bit different than a grant, in that a grant typically is again obtained from a state, federal government, sometimes even local units of government, depending on where you live, where you're located. But they differ in a couple key areas. One of which is a big deal, is the fact that most grants are competitive in nature. They require you to submit information and stack your project up against other people, the projects that they want to do. And there'll usually be some type of grading criteria or scoring criteria, which is used to evaluate the strength of your application. Of course, as part of doing all of this, it's very easy for me to say that grants do require the most work. Whereas a rebate may only be a couple-page form, you check a couple boxes, grants sometimes can be in excess of 100 to 150 pages. In there, there'll be forms. You may need outside engineering to support some of the statements that you're making. You may have to go through an energy audit process. One of the best examples, which some of you, and I hope a lot of you, are familiar with and want to become more familiar with, is the USDA's Rural Energy for America program, or the REAP program. And we'll touch on that a little bit later down the road. Another main type of incentive that I want to kind of define a little bit more and determine if it's right for you is the idea of tax credits. Tax credits vary, again, wildly from state to state. And there are a couple federal tax credits that currently exist. And they can or cannot apply to renewable energy projects or energy efficiency projects, again, depending on where you live. The great thing about tax credits is that they're a part of the tax preparation process. Your accountant, if pointed in the right direction, should be able to assist you with the forms. And this is usually a very easy process. If there is a downside to looking at tax credits as being a mechanism by which to evaluate and get some money back for some of your projects, is you've got to have a liability. If you're not paying any taxes, it can be very difficult to actually harness the power and the value of those tax credits. One of the most common tax credits that applies to all of us out there, if you are looking at a renewable energy project, solar, wind, biomass, something like that, is something offered by the Department of Treasury, which is known as the Business Energy Investment Tax Credit. Again, that information can be found at the desired website that I referenced earlier, and we'll touch on it a little bit here down the road. Leveraging incentives. We've defined them. We've talked about the different types and know that there are others. There are such things as carbon credits, renewable energy credits, energy efficiency credits, but for purposes of trying to keep this thing under 6 hours long, we'll leave that for a separate day or direct conversations with me. So now it's important to talk about how do you leverage incentives and what does that actually mean? Well, I want to talk about, first of all, the fact that there are two different types of incentives, and we're going to spend the majority of today really talking about incentives that relate directly to capital equipment, expanding your facility, building a new facility, or retrofitting certain aspects of your existing operations. Now, I want to be clear that as you're thinking about incentives in general, there is another category out there which really is kind of related to business and market expansion. Next, thank you, Chris. And these are really incentives that are aimed more at the development of a business or a business model. Usually they don't point you in a typical direction for how do we help pay for a particular piece of equipment. But in some cases, if a particular piece of equipment or process or expansion is needed to expand your market base or your business presence, there are grants that will help you out there as well. Today's world, I can tell you all that there is a lot of interest in funding agencies to support urban agriculture, locally produced food products, as well as R&D for new techniques which are going to make you a more profitable and a more productive grower. Again, if anybody has any questions on some of these, feel free to contact me after the fact. But without further ado, we'll kind of move into some of the capital equipment just so we can get that out there. So your head is thinking here about what types of things are we really talking about. So when we talk about capital equipment and their ability to garner incentives, there's a couple buzzwords and keywords which are very important. Efficiency and conservation. So generally, we're talking about equipment that reduces the consumption of something, be it natural gas, propane, oil, heating products, or maybe it's other things that reduce electricity usage, lights, more efficient fans, motors, that kind of thing, as well as projects that are able to reduce the consumption of water. That covers a majority of the efficiency type of related technologies, but it also is very important to know that renewable energy projects and technologies are also incentivized quite heavily. Primarily here what we're talking about is solar, be it solar photovoltaic or solar thermal, biomass projects to produce either heat or heat and electricity or just electricity alone, as well as incentives that will help with geothermal installations and also to a lesser degree even wind installations. So just to bring that up, I want to make sure everyone knows that we're really talking about two different categories, renewable energy and energy efficiency. Just to, again, kind of just dial you in here a little bit, you'll see a list there of technologies which are very common technologies that are incentivized. Heating systems, hot water, condensing boilers, non-condensing boilers operating in the hot water, even the distribution of the hot water, control, zoning, energy efficient, high efficiency unit heaters. These are all great examples. Along with that, we also have technologies which will help to improve what I'm going to just broadly define as the envelope. Energy curtains are a very well incentivized technology. Even looking at the design of any new structures or retrofits that you might be making, the use of open roofs, the use of roll-up sidewalls, and also the glazing materials. If you have the ability to use a more efficient glazing, sometimes that can also be incentivized. We don't want to forget about lighting. There are, again, different programs aimed at getting new HIDs to replace degraded ones, using LEDs, or even the use of T5 or T8 fixtures for courtesy lighting. Excuse me. The other thing that is kind of in a weird category by itself here and has seen a lot of recent traction is also technologies that help to conserve water. I've found that these types of incentives are really localized depending on where you're located in the country, especially areas where there are issues surrounding water quality or water scarcity. Technologies that are going to enable you to limit the amount of water that's coming off of your facility, to be able to reuse it so that ultimately you use less water. Again, another hot topic right now that a lot of people can find some incentive money to actually help pay for. And lastly, these are the things that make up all the parts and pieces. And again, these are typically items, the miscellaneous items. They may be smaller dollar ticket items, but they should not be neglected. When we start to talk about how to really go through the process, more efficient pumps and motors and VFDs, automation in some cases, and even other control systems, again, are all types of technologies that have usually some type of applicability to a rebate or incentive program, again, depending on where you are. I had mentioned briefly before that renewable energy technologies, I'm listing it here again, solar PV, solar thermal, biomass, geothermal, wind, because I do want to bring home the point that not all of you may be considering renewable energy projects. However, they can be a pretty good investment. If you've done the things at your facility to become as efficient as possible, and you're looking for ways in which to further reduce your operational costs and make some strong investments, renewable energy technologies such as these, when used in combination with the appropriate incentives, can prove to be pretty viable project opportunities for you, so take a look at them.
Dan, let me jump in with a question real quick. Of all the kind of categories of capital investments you've listed so far, what are the most popular lately? What are you seeing the most grant action around? Can you tell me?
Yeah, if I had to put it kind of in order of 1, 2, 3, and really get very specific, there's a lot of money right now for technologies such as condensing boilers and basically using water hydronic systems as opposed to conventional unit heaters. That is a big one. There's some very easy prescriptive rebates aimed at the use of condensing unit heaters, high efficiency unit heaters. And there also is a very big push right now with both energy curtains as well as solar PV systems. And if I had to give you the top 4, that's what I would tell you.
All right. And is there any areas that the government or the manufacturers offering rebates are really interested in, where there's extra money available, or it's easier to get, or is it all about the same?
Well, it's a very hard question to answer. It varies wildly, from location to location. By way of example, I can give you a short example here where if I was a grower, for example, and I was considering putting up a solar PV system, and I was in Massachusetts, for example, it would not be uncommon to find an incentive structure, an incentive base that may be able to reduce the cost of that project by, close to 50%. Try to do that same thing in, say, West Virginia, and you would find 0 incentives related to that. So again, it really just kind of varies wildly from location to location.
All right, great example.
So let's get started. I mean, now we're talking about incentives. We've defined them. You know, what does it take to actually take these words and this presentation and turn it into something for our audience that they can actually use and start the process of getting started? The number one thing that I'm going to tell you is to start early. Planning and starting this process early is really one of the most important things that you can do. If you don't plan and start early, what you will find is that you will be working towards a goal and run out of time. You may have to submit paperwork and it may have to be reviewed, and if you can't start the process early enough, all of a sudden you may find that your timeline is not in line with that of the incentives, and you're going to have to make a decision. Do I go forward without using incentives, or do I hold off and wait? But as part of that, what you really need to do as part of the starting early process is start to identify what is the scope of the project. What are we doing? Try to draw a box around it and put all of your ideas in there, whether it be just buying a new piece of equipment, whether it's multiple pieces of equipment. It's going to be very beneficial for you to be able to identify what the scope of the project is, because the next step in the process is going to be starting to identify the funding sources. And what's going to be really of key importance here is when you reach out to people, I'm going to advise you later on to make sure that you reach out and actually do something. You're going to end up eventually having to talk with somebody on the phone or start to exchange emails. And they're going to ask you, hey, what is the scope of your project? What are you trying to do? Why do we want to incentivize you to do this? Why do we want to help you financially in order to make this happen? And if you can't clearly elaborate on what it is you're exactly trying to do, you're going to find that you're going to start off kind of in a process of exchanging a lot of emails, wasting a lot of time because you haven't clearly identified what the project scope is. So, you know, you've identified what your scope is, you've identified the funding sources, and now you're really starting to hit the point where the rubber meets the road, and that is contacting these agencies. Whether it be a grant and you contact the USDA representative, whether it be a rebate that you're looking to utilize, and you reach out to your utility company. This, again, is where things really start to get interesting. Now you're contacting the people who have the money, letting them know about what your idea is, and starting to get that idea planted in their head. Hey, this project is going to be coming in. We have it on our radar screen now, and hopefully we can begin to leverage the programs that are out there and get these guys started off on the right foot. You've done that now. You've contacted the funding sources. They've probably sent you maybe a couple intake forms asking for very basic information. Where are you located? You know, are you a gas customer? Are you electric customer? Are you in a certain area within the state? They're going to start doing that, give you those forms, and really now it's time to start planning how to evaluate your project. You know, what it is that you want to do. In a kind of what I like to call a with and a without incentive scenario. Many times when we're talking about using incentives, regardless of what kind it is, there's an inherent nature that if you're looking to purchase equipment that, say, is more efficient, likelihood is it may be more expensive. And so what you need to do is really start to consider what your project looks like, not just in an initial first cost kind of way, but in a 5 to 6 to 7 to 10, whatever that time period may be, type of window, where you start to really look at, okay, if it costs me this amount of money today and I get a rebate and I become more efficient, where do I look in 6 years? If I compare that with if I went with maybe, say, something that was a little less efficient, a little less costly. You know, first costs are very important, but as with any of these projects, they really need to be evaluated over a period of time so that you can really truly start to see what the value of the incentive is and what the value of the project is going to be to your organization. You may then find, as you've been planning and you look at this, that you've identified the particular incentive that you're going to look at. And what I want to stress here is that you may find that it seems like a lot of work. You know, free money is not free money, honestly. Free money does require time. It requires your time or somebody's time to make sure that the information is passed on and that you can be eligible for these rebates. So I always want to encourage growers to do what they do best, and that is not complete paperwork and fill out forms and write papers. Your job, in my humble opinion, is to make sure that you're servicing your customers and that you're growing high-quality products that are going to make you successful. And if you can do these other things and help to get some of the incentive money coming your way, but you need the services of a third party, know that those third parties are out there. Sustainable Energy Financing, the company I founded, this is what we did. And I think there's great value in that, and I always encourage growers to consider alternatives rather than just trying to shoulder the load all themselves.
Hey, Dan, I think you just answered Wayne's question. He says you put in a solar system and the paperwork took longer than the installation. So where do you get the help for that with that paperwork? And I think you just answered that, third-party services, whether it's you or another provider, right?
Well, it absolutely could be, somebody like Sustainable Energy Financing, but there's also a certain amount that, obviously you see TrueLeaf being a sponsor here, and it's one thing that TrueLeaf has really started to do is to be able to provide a little bit more support here because we understand, what's required. Not that you can't do it by yourself, but, Wayne's experience is not uncommon. Especially with a project like a solar PV project. It may only take you a couple weeks to put up and build, and you may spend 2 months just filling out the paperwork and waiting for people to approve it. So, very good example by Wayne there. So now that we've, again, trying to just kind of leave things in a very nice sequential order here, we've kind of begun to understand the incentives, what types of technologies are available. We've touched on, kind of the general process, but now I really want to kind of break down the specific processes as it relates to rebates, grants, and tax credits, because each of them follows a little bit different track. And if you can understand what the different processes are, you're ultimately going to save yourself a lot of time, a lot of energy, and hopefully a lot of headaches. So let's talk first about rebates. Again, as I said earlier, rebates are, God bless them, they're great. Usually they're very easy to go after, they're very quick, but again, there is a relatively defined order, and even though I've talked about these things very wildly from state to state, my experience has told me that the process, generally speaking, is the same. And so we'll just kind of run through these here real quick. First step, again, once you've identified your project and gotten your scope done, you need to reach out and contact. You need to actually do something. So you're going to contact your utility supplier, your state government who's offering the program, and let them know that you're here. That is going to lead into some type of application. There's always an application that's needed. Again, the rebate applications are typically among the easiest. They're usually the least scary of the bunch, but there will be an application, which, again, fill it out, get it back. If you have questions, reach back out to the agency that's offering the money. They'll help you to clarify. Once you've got the application completed, usually rebates, the next thing that they do is they offer you what will be called a letter of approval, a letter of intent. Essentially acknowledging the fact that they see your project and that they will approve it for X amount of dollars. Once you've gotten this approval letter or an approval in an email, however it may be, you now are in a pretty good spot. You should know how much that equipment's going to cost, and you know what the amount of the rebate's going to be, and that you're approved for it. So then what do? Go out and buy the stuff. Almost without exception, all incentives operate on a reimbursement basis. You're not going to get money for things before you ever buy them. So if you're utilizing a rebate program, once you've been approved, go out, purchase the equipment, and get it installed. The installation, and now that you've got the technology commissioned and operating, you can really see that you're near the end of the cycle. You got it working. A lot of times what's required now is you call the utility company back up and you say, hey, we've purchased it, we got it installed, and they'll come out, check it out, kick the tires a little bit, and at that point they are able then to offer you the reimbursement, which is based on the amount that was approved earlier in the process. Now, this differs slightly from looking at, say, a grant, such as the REAP program. And I want to use the REAP program just as a really good example because it is a federal program that anybody who's an agricultural producer, regardless of location, can utilize. So potentially everybody who's listening in right now would have an opportunity to consider a REAP grant as being a viable source of funding for their project. So again, to go through the basic process, and I'll point out the differences really between the two, not a lot of difference at step one. You know, you got your project sized up, it's time to reach out and talk to the USDA. Every single state in the country will have a USDA office, and many times they will have multiple offices that service a different geographical region within the state. A very quick Google search of USDA and list your hometown will get you to where you need to go, and will get you the phone number for who you need to contact. So you'll contact them, you'll let them know. And again, there's an application process. In this case, instead of them sending you a 1 or 2 page form to fill out, they're going to give you an application template, which is going to really go through a very comprehensive analysis of the whole project. The objective here with a grant, again, being competitive in nature, and the fact that, say, the USDA wants to give money to the best projects, you've got to demonstrate that, all the way from such things as, you know, your business history. How long have you been in business? Are you doing well? You know, through being able to demonstrate that you have, you know, enough funds to pay for whatever the grant's not going to pay for. The last thing they want to do is approve a grant for somebody and then come to find out that the applicant who's been awarded the grant can't actually pay for the remainder of the equipment. Excuse me. So that's a very important part of the process. Many people, this is within sustainable energy financing in my past, this is typically the point at which our phone would ring. I may point them in the right direction and say, hey, call your USDA person, they'll get you started. They look at the template and they go, yeah, I don't think I'm going to want to do this by myself. And so this is where you look to really bring in maybe a third party. Somebody that specializes in the preparation of grant materials, somebody who's going to act as the go-between between the funding agency and, you know, the guy that's working, you know, at your place to gather all of the information. And, you know, there are other companies out there that really do this work. You know, again, you can do a Google search, look up grant writing companies. One thing that I found is that usually there's not a whole lot of people that specialize in our industry and understand a lot of the intricacies and complexities of, you know, trying to look at developing projects which are, you know, energy efficient and make sense, and understanding it in a controlled environment kind of atmosphere. So if you are going to bring in the services of a third party, check them out. Make sure you know that they're going to be able to get the job done for you. Make sure that they've got a history of doing good work, and that they're going to have the ability to carry that thing through and ultimately help get you some funding. After that, though, the process really kind of mirrors that of a rebate. The one thing that I want to, a really big misconception as it relates specifically to the REAP program, is that with the REAP program, you have the ability to submit an application. And have that application be complete and give it to your USDA representative. One area in which the REAP program differentiates itself from a lot of other grant programs is that once you've submitted the application, you do not need to be approved or you know, get the congratulations, you've been selected type of letter. Once you've submitted the application, you can go forward and go ahead with your project. Meanwhile, the application itself may be getting graded and scored. You could even have the thing up and operational, whatever it may be, for 2, 3, 6 months, and all of a sudden you get a letter in the mail that says, hey, congratulations, you've been selected for a grant. The reason that this is really important is that, you know, say the project that you're looking to undertake is going to be one which really makes a lot of sense. You're going to do it anyways. Well, if you're going to do it anyways, and you have the ability to harness some additional incentive funding from this program, you might as well do it because, you know, it should turn out to be a pretty good scenario for you, especially if it does end up being selected for funding. And the reason that the REAP program is really different from a lot of grant programs, again, is that the underarching idea behind a grant is that you need some money in order to make this project become a reality. Most other grant programs work like that. They want you to be approved for their grant first, so that way you can demonstrate that logic. Hey, I don't, if I'm not applying for the grant before I buy something, what do I need the money for? So that's a really important part about the USDA REAP program, which I want to make sure everyone's well aware of. But again, now that you've actually purchased the equipment, hey, it's time to go ahead, get it installed. Approval will come shortly after that. Again, they're going to come out and kick the tires, make sure that what you said you were going to do in the grant application is ultimately what you did. There is some flexibility in this particular program with being able to change equipment specs and things like that. But for the most part, whatever you put on a piece of paper is what they want to see when they show up at your facility. At that point, you know, again, they sign off, approve it, and they begin to give you the reimbursable amounts that you are due. With the REAP program specifically, it is 25% of project costs, anything that could be lumped into the project.
Okay. We got a question or two about grants. Do grants have to be paid back like a loan? Asks Mike.
Mike, they do not. Grants are grants. That money is yours once they award it to you. It is worth pointing out that grants should be treated as taxable income. So make sure that you consider that. When it comes time for you to file your taxes, specifically with the USDA REAP program, it will be very clear to the Department of Treasury when it comes time to file taxes that you received an amount of money. The larger the amount of money, of course, the larger amount of taxes that you're going to have to pay on that money. So make sure that you take that into account, factor it in. But grants are grants. That is your money, and you do not have to repay it.
All right. And what about, let's see, is any matching money required for some grants?
Almost without exception. Actually, I will say without exception. I have never had the opportunity to work on a grant which has paid for 100% of project costs. The USDA REAP grants is a 25-75 match, meaning they'll pay for 25% of it, but you have to match the other 75. Many state grants usually operate in that same type of area. Sometimes they'll do a 50-50. And there's also a pretty unique program which is kind of halfway between a grant and a rebate, but it's something that's offered by the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is another sub-agency of the USDA, and it's called the Environmental Qualities Incentive Program. And depending on where you are, that's actually a 75-25 or sometimes even up to a 90-10. Where they will cover 75% of the cost and your match is only 25%, or in some cases it's 90% they will pay for and you will only have to pay for 10%. But I've never seen a grant program that has not had some type of matching funds component.
Okay. And a couple of rebate questions before we get too far away from those. Faye wants to know, she says there's many types of equipment listed on our utilities website that qualify for rebates. Is it possible these brands are more expensive to start with so that even with the rebate they won't be as inexpensive as comparable brands?
The answer to that is yes. And this really, I think, speaks to the earlier point that I wanted to make was even with the rebate, the final cost to you initially may be slightly higher. However, if that piece of equipment is more expensive, and if it's going to operate more efficient than something that is a little bit cheaper, if you evaluate that over a time span of 5, 6, 7 years, hopefully you come out ahead. Hopefully over that same amount of time, the first cost of the purchasing and the installation of equipment combined with the savings that you're going to get will actually put you in a better place than buying a standard piece of equipment that, say, isn't eligible for a rebate.
All right. So your savings would be over time, not on the initial purchase, but that could amount to more for a better piece of equipment then.
In most cases it does. You know, in most cases, rebates are aimed at covering, you know, some portion, some percentage, a meaningful portion or a meaningful percentage of the incremental cost difference between, say, a base piece of equipment and one that's more efficient. But it's that gain in efficiency over time that actually is going to allow you to have a much better type of economic scenario 5-6 years down the road.
There you go. Think long term. And also, you had said grants are taxable. How about rebates? Taxable income if you get a rebate?
Depends on who they come from and depends on where you are. Again, I hate that answer, but I can answer it unequivocally with dealing with the REAP grant, for example. But in certain states, grants that are offered by the state government may not have to be treated as taxable income in the state, and due to the manner in which they pay you, they may not have to be considered as taxable income from the federal perspective either.
All right, let's move on to tax credits now. How about that?
Now, tax credits we won't spend a whole lot of time on, simply because it's probably, you know, among the easiest processes. Really, again, instead of contacting somebody, you want to consult. You want to talk with your accountant, your CPA, whoever's doing your taxes for you. Hopefully they've got a good feel for the various forms that are out there. Earlier I had mentioned the Business Energy Investment Tax Credit, which is a 30% tax credit for the installation of renewable energy technologies. It's a one-page, maybe it's 1.5 pages, a form. Something basically where you list the amount of money that is spent and the amount of credit that you are claiming for that particular year. And through consulting with your tax professional, your tax preparer, they should be able to direct you as to how you're going to actually claim that tax credit, that 30%. So really what you want to do with tax credits is start with internally. Start with the guy that's helping you, the guy or gal that's helping you to prepare the taxes, so you kind of can get an idea of what to expect. Once you've got a good feel for it, and hopefully you've got a good relationship, you trust your CPA, go out, purchase the equipment, again, get it installed, and then you're going to ultimately claim that tax credit at the end of the year once it's been installed and is commissioned and operating. There's not a whole lot more that needs to be said about tax credits because they do vary wildly from place to place. But just know that the process is a little bit different. You don't have to get approval from the government before you go ahead with buying something, but you do want to have the trust that your tax professional is going to be able to give you good advice so that when it comes time to do the taxes, you don't have any surprises. That's the last thing that anybody wants. Now, this is my attempt at humor, the big fat F there, but I do really want to lay out, the 7 deadly sins. I think there might only be 6 of them, but we'll call it 7 for now. But these are costly mistakes that I have had the opportunity to see happen to those working with me. They did some things on their own, or I pointed them in the right direction, let's say. And they just went out and kind of did their thing, and they didn't run through this checklist. And ultimately, in the end, in some cases, it cost them the ultimate sacrifice, which was losing out on money that was completely due to them, but because they did things in the wrong order or they didn't check certain things, they got 0. They got an F on that particular job they were trying to do. So to run through them, number 1, check the program funding. I've directed you to the website, the Desire website, which is a really good resource. And if anybody's been to that site, if anybody goes to that site, if they're looking at that site right now, you will see that there are hundreds and hundreds of different programs located throughout the state. And it is impossible to keep that list up to date on a day-to-day basis. There's simply too much. So 2 things as it relates there. 1, if you see a program that applies to you, make sure that the funds are still there, that they haven't been exhausted. The second thing is make sure you know what the program deadline is. I've been contacted by individuals that look to apply for some type of rebate, and they call me the day after the program deadline has expired. And unfortunately, I get to say to them, hey, if you had called last week, you'd be in great shape. However, right now, the deadline's up. There's no more funding in the program. You're going to need to wait until it comes out if it does come out, before you look at this again. So those are two really big ones. The third one is to make sure that you read some of the fine print and check the eligibility requirements. One of the best examples of this is, say you're a natural gas customer and it looks like there's a tremendous incentive available to help you buy, say, a new condensing boiler. In the small print, there might be language which speaks to you needing to use a certain amount of natural gas or be an existing customer for a certain defined period of time. And it's these types of little devil in the detail kind of things you want to make sure you address very early on in the process and make sure that, in fact, you are eligible. And usually the best way to do that, again, is to talk with the program administrator, talk with a professional, and go through those eligibility requirements and get them checked off one by one so you know that, in fact, there's money, you're going to meet the deadline, and that you are eligible for the program. The next item here, we've touched on it, but as a general rule, you should not spend money on things until approved or until conversation has begun with the funding agency. This goes back to that point that if you're applying for grants, rebates, funds, the central theme should be you're trying to access this program because you need the incentive that is being offered in order to change your behavior. That's what an incentive truly is. And if you are spending money on things prior to being approved, it's very easy for somebody to make the assumption or the decision that you really don't need the incentive in order to make this purchase or make this decision. And many times, if you do things out of order like that, and you buy a particular piece of equipment before being approved, you can all of a sudden find yourself completely ineligible to receive the grant that you should be able to receive if you had done things in the right order. The only exception to this rule that is pretty typical is that fees related to design and or engineering of more complex systems are often okay. In order for you to tell somebody how much something is going to cost and what the benefits are going to be, it's a fair assumption to say that there should be some reasonable and adequate design and engineering costs to get you to that point. So keep that in mind. Also to keep in mind is, again, I want to harp on this, is know your limits. Do what you do best, manage your time appropriately, bring in third-party services if you need to. You may find these programs to be cumbersome, and if you can't manage your time properly, you could all of a sudden end up being one of those people that unfortunately just can't get the paperwork done in time, and you start trying to bring in somebody too late in the process, and you miss the deadline. And that's just not something that you want to have happen. Finally, execute and follow up. It's really easy to hop on the phone and talk with an incentive company. It's really easy to talk to a utility company. It's easy to talk with the USDA and have all these wonderful things told to you. But unless you actually execute on that plan and continually follow up, you're going to find that you will ultimately not get to the point at which you hope to be, which is being on the receiving end of some incentive dollars for a project that you want to do. So we've touched on what I hope is a very good kind of process, explanation of the different incentives, the different technologies, all of those things. Now just to make it a little bit more concrete, bring it home, let's just run through a couple examples of a couple projects that I've directly been involved in just within the past 12 months where people have used this process with and without my help and the results. I had the opportunity to work on a 2-acre expansion. They decided to evaluate how they were going to do the build-out, what type of equipment they were going to use, and ultimately chose some things that were a little bit more expensive than what they could have done to get the job done, but it's going to create that perfect environment that they need. It's also going to operate more efficiently over time. They incorporated an open roof design to eliminate some electrical usage from additional ventilation. They went with hot water heating system and used condensing technology. They installed energy curtains. They put in brand new HIDs and T5 lighting with electronic ballasts. And they also, made sure that the utility company knew that they were going to install a sophisticated environmental control system. At the end of the day, that added up to approximately about $200,000 for this particular grower. which I don't think is an insignificant amount of money by any means. The other project, just to demonstrate, hey, that's kind of a bigger one. It's nice to get a couple $100,000 back, but these can also, the incentives can also be leveraged on smaller projects. In this case, a retrofit type of project, taking one range of existing houses and basically replacing the unit heaters, again, with a hydronic system, tearing out the old energy curtains that were 10 years old and installing them brand new ones. This particular company actually leveraged multiple incentives, which is something that's important. Just because you leverage a program usually doesn't preclude you from being able to use another program. So in this case, they were actually able to get a REAP grant, which paid for 25% of their overall project. They were able to get a very easy prescriptive rebate for energy curtains equal to 20 cents a square foot. And they also got a rebate on the condensing boiler in the amount of $4 per 1,000 BTU of output. As a result, all of these things bundled together ultimately reduced the project cost by about 50% and brought the payback and all these things down to less than 2 years, in addition to receiving the long-term benefits of the gain in efficiency. So those are a couple good examples of efficiency-related projects, which I think demonstrate, clearly success stories. But it's not limited to just efficiency.
Dan, let me interrupt there because I think you just answered a question from Jean-Marc who was asking, and in fact I wrote it down, so it's a good question, Jean-Marc. Can you claim a rebate, a grant, and a tax credit on the same piece of equipment or the same project? And obviously they did here.
You absolutely can, and just to give everybody out there that one sprinkle of hope, I was involved in one project in the state of Ohio 4 or 5 years ago, in which the total sum of all rebates and grants and everything that they had in tax credits, grant, rebate, tax credit, was actually equal to 105% of what they paid for the project. As funny as that may sound, at the end of the day, they were actually paid money to install, this was a solar project, but they actually received money to make about a $75,000 investment. So that doesn't happen very often. That's a bit extreme, but it definitely shows that you can stack these things on top of each other and really get some benefit.
All right.
So again, I just wanted to touch on one more example of a project, a different type of project. Again, this was a solar project, again, up in Connecticut. You've seen a couple references to Connecticut here on the screen from me. I'm using Connecticut just because it happens to be a pretty good place to find incentives. So if you're in Connecticut, you can give yourself a little pat on the back because there are quite a few options out there. But in this particular example, again, a Connecticut grower installing a solar PV array. The idea is basically make your own electricity and quit purchasing it from the utility company. And again, they went and leveraged multiple types of incentives. As you can see, they took a REAP grant, which paid for 25% of it. They have a tax credit, which allows them to take 30% off of that. And I should note that when you talk about the federal tax credit for renewables, it doesn't apply the 25% discount that you're getting from the REAP grant. So you're actually getting 25% of the original cost, and you're actually getting a tax credit, which is 30% of the original cost. By my math, very simple, assuming that this grower had a particular liability all in year one, basically you can see that he's got over a 50% reduction in cost within the first year. Not to mention the fact that he can use things like modified accelerated cost recovery system and bonus depreciation to write some other costs off. And basically what this did was, take a solar project which can have a longer payback than you might want to see if you didn't look at incentives, to something that is, reasonable. Under 5 years for a piece of equipment, a technology that's going to last in excess of 20 years. And I would consider, I think they're very happy with how they did, and that represents a very viable kind of a long-term investment strategy to reinvest in your own business. So now what do we do now? given you all the information. We have laid out a couple examples. Just a couple takeaways from here. First, look for the opportunities for efficiency. Just sitting around in your office not doing anything isn't going to do anything. So go out and look for those opportunities for efficiency. And how are you going to do that? Well, vendors, call TrueLeaf. We're a good place to start. We know what types of things are going to be beneficial for your operation long term from a efficiency operational standpoint. So call us. Another thing, read the news. GrowerTalks has information, published all the time on what types of things are being undertaken at other growers, state-of-the-art cutting technology, new approaches to becoming more efficient, more energy efficient, more operationally efficient. And also talk with energy auditors and talk with your neighbors. Most of us don't operate in a bubble. We have friends, we have neighbors in the growing community that have done things and been successful. So learn from them and take their cue. And sometimes you don't have to replicate all the hard work they put in. You can simply learn from what they've done and then be able to really kind of reap the benefits of what they're doing. So one of the things that I want to bring up here at this moment is, say you've done that. If you have looked for those opportunities and you're looking at a pile of papers on your desk representing some projects that you think represent a good opportunity to garner some incentives, what we're doing really, from the TrueLeaf sponsorship on this is that Sustainable Energy Financing, the website, and the info apps email address there. If you have a project that you would like to have reviewed to see what type of incentives are available, you don't want to go clicking around on the desired website, you can get a free incentive analysis. Send an email to the info@sef-llc.com. It will be received. Use the word TrueLeaf in the subject line or in the contact line, somewhere in there, indicating that you've been at today's webinar. And within 48 to 72 hours, you will get contacted back either via email or a phone call with an analysis of your project and what types of things look to be a reasonable expectation for how you can utilize some different incentives to help fund your project. Again, that's really something that TrueLeaf is offering up here, and we thank them for that. And hopefully many of you will take advantage of it.
Well, that's a very cool opportunity, Dan.
Well, I think it'll be beneficial for many, and I hope the phones ring off the hook. And with that, I want to say thank you to everybody that's here. Please note my contact information, and I hope to hear from people very soon. Thank you.
All right. We've got a couple of questions I want to get to real quickly, and actually there's a few more detailed questions that I jotted down, like from Michael, from Peter, from Mark, and I'm going to share those with Dan so he can actually get in touch with you directly, because I think they're beyond the scope of a quick 2-second answer. But here's some simple question: do grant or rebate companies expect equipment to be professionally installed, or can you do it yourself?
Varies.
You say that a lot.
Yeah, isn't that great? That gives me an answer to every question. No, it really depends on the specific program that you're looking to access. One really great thing about being labeled, say, an agricultural producer is that many funding agencies, grant, rebate, regardless, recognize that you may do a lot of work yourself. You've got labor, competent labor that can do many things. And so really then it becomes more a question of not including installation costs, say, within the amount of money that you're looking for. Other programs do require that you have to work within a defined category of vendors. You may have to work with a contractor, say, that's been through training and knows the particular program. New York is known for this. A lot of growers in New York have to go through a process where they contact a contractor, they come out, they do a quick energy analysis, they list the findings, and then the equipment does have to be installed by somebody who has been deemed competent by the particular agency in New York, which is called NYSERDA. So that's just a good example of that. But again, it really varies, and I wish I could answer a little bit more specifically. Give me a call.
All right, and well, the $64 question, these third-party companies like your old company, what do they tend to charge to do the grant writing?
Well, you're going to find two models. Again, I can say varies to a certain extent, but you're going to find a couple different models by which these third-party companies operate, really kind of depending on what their competency and core competency is. Many companies that simply write grants will charge a flat fee based on the size and complexity of the project as it relates to the incentive that you're applying for. In some cases, a $10,000 addition of 3-4 unit heaters may require just as much work as a $200,000 new build. And so they may just say, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars for us to do this. I can tell you sustainable energy financing operates under a different structure, which is based on really more of a performance kind of contract. You'll need to, basically make some type of a retainer or application preparation fee, which is usually just large enough to cover operating expenses to actually write that grant. But then if you get the grant, you get the money, then you pay an X amount percentage of whatever money is able to be garnered. There's still other models where energy audit companies may also offer grant-related services, and so you'll pay for an energy audit, and then they'll split the application on a much cheaper basis, or maybe even for free. So again, it really is a little difficult to just give you a blanket answer.
All right, and I'm assuming because we're doing this webinar, despite the current economic climate in this country, there is money available, right?
There is money available, and I wanted to actually take the time yesterday to make a couple phone calls, and one thing many of you may be interested in hearing, is this farm bill. What's happening with the farm bill? Reason being the REAP grant is attached to that. Funding from the National Resource Conservation Service also received some funding through that. So the short answer is yes, there is still money available. These programs still exist. Rebate levels coming from utility companies are actually on the increase due to, some of you may be familiar with renewable portfolio standards or energy efficiency portfolio standards. So money is, you may look at your utility bill and see that $5 surcharge for green electricity. Well, know that that $5 surcharge is going into a fund to help pay for other people's energy efficiency projects. So if you get sick of seeing that $5, $6, $10, $20 charge on there, just know that more than likely there's probably a program that all that money is being funneled into.
Right.
Ultimately, REAP funding will be finalized within the next couple months, but in general, the money's there, and I don't believe that it's going to go away, at least in the near term.
All right. Well, there's Dan's contact information one more time, dkuipers@trueleaf.net if you've got specific questions. People have asked, will this be archived? Yes. As I said at the beginning, ballpublishing.com/webinars, probably within the hour if I'm fast. And so that said, I want to thank Dan and all the folks at TrueLeaf for helping out with this webinar. And for Ball Publishing, I am Chris Beytes saying so long, everybody.